So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are in the world. So thanks again to join us for a very nice talk that will be done today by Professor Patrick Madden. But before giving the floor to him, just some few announcements. So if you lost past talks, so we have about 150 talks available in this YouTube channel with very interesting talks, and I'm sure that you are going to find very interesting ones. Then, in about 2 months, we are going to have the next edition of SBCCI, this time in the jungle. So it was organized in Manaus 25 years ago. So we are back to Manaus end of August. And then we are going to have also an extension in a hotel in the jungle, so a floating hotel. So you have to do your reservation as soon as possible because there is a limit in the number of rooms. Then you have still the opportunity to come to South America if you are not here. So VLSI SOC that goes around the world. So this year is in Puerto Varas in Chile. The deadline for papers has already finished, but you can still submit for the PhD and the student forum till June 30. So this will also be a very nice location to go. And then you can work in your papers for Alaska's 2026 in Arequipa, in Peru. So the deadline is beginning of September. So we have still some months to prepare your papers. And as you know, best papers are invited to prepare extended versions for IEEE TCAS 1 and IEEE TCAS 2. And together we have IberChip, that is a co-located workshop where we can also submit the papers not only in English, but also in Spanish and Portuguese. And 2027, Lascas and Iberships goes to Panama, so also another location to go. But today we are here to attend to listen to the talk by Professor Patrick Madden from Binghamton University in USA. So Patrick Madden is an associate professor in the Binghamton University School of Computing. He is a past chair of ACM SIGDA, the ACM SIG Governing Board, and a former member of the ACM Executive Committee and Publication Board. He has served on the Steering Committee and Technical Program Committee of DAC, ICCAT, ISPDAC, Data, and ISPD, and has chaired ISPD. His primary research interests are on combinatories and optimization, with an emphasis on VLSI physical design problems. So thank you very much again, Patrick, to accept our invitation, and the floor is with you to start your presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. Really nice to be here. I'm going to talk about a handful of things that I've been sort of interested in for the past 20 odd years, and try to put this in perspective as how I look at EDA, VLSI physical design problems. Firm believer in algorithms. I like heuristics a lot. I'm probably notorious for grumbling about AI, and so we'll touch on that a little bit. But where I want to go, start off in big picture, I'm probably going to talk quite a bit about graph partitioning. There has been some great work done in this area over the past few years, and I think some really great ideas that apply elsewhere. I'll also talk a little bit about simulated annealing. And then I'll pivot into a problem that looks nothing like partitioning, chip global routing, and try to explain how I'm looking at global routing these days, and talk about some work that's actually going to be presenting next week at Great Lakes GLS VLSI. And if we got time, I'm going to try to move quickly. I'll stir up some trouble with mixed size placement as well. Big picture is that VLSI design problems are generally pretty hard. Lots of integer discrete variables, lots of complex constraints, and pretty much everything we want to do is NP-complete or multiple NP-complete problems that are all mashed together. And the problems are not small. We're talking chip-sized problems, so hundreds, millions, billions of wires, complex delay calculations. These are all tough optimization problems. And so I want to talk about graph partitioning, and I'll probably, some of this may seem a little strange. Over on the left, got a simple graph, just two vertices, vertex A, vertex B. And over on the right is what I'll call the solution space. Every possible rearrangement of those two vertices into different partitions. So I've got two vertices, I've got 4 nodes in my solution space, 4 different possible configurations. And when I think about optimization, I'm thinking actually about this side. You're at some configuration in the solution space, so your spot here, and you can move one of these vertices around, so you can maybe go over here, go over here. Optimization to me is you're in a solution space and you're trying to find some better configuration within that solution space. And what makes this all challenging is the solution space grows exponentially as you get more variables, more things to worry about. Over on the right, I like generating PostScript from scratch, so I built a PostScript picture generator. Plug in the number of vertices. If I've got 8 vertices, I've got 256 different possible configurations where I can partition them into 2 groups. Lots of neighbors here. And there's no clean way to divide and conquer to get an optimal solution other than just brute force. It's an intractable problem. But just because it's intractable doesn't mean that we don't have good methods for it. And so I'll start off with Kernighan Lin from about 1970. And key idea here, this idea of hill climbing. Great idea that pops up everywhere. What Kernighan and Lin were doing is they were actually doing chip layout or circuit design, trying to figure out how do you separate these electronic components into multiple circuit boards so you can build these gadgets at Bell Labs. And so they were interested in the partitioning problem because of circuit design sorts of things. And their key idea, take one thing on one side of the partition, one thing on the other, swap them over, keep on doing that, trying to make things better. And if you're in a situation where you can't find 2 things to swap and make things better, do it anyway. And we talk a little bit about why this is sort of essential. Over on the left-hand side here, I've got a simple partitioning problem. It's got a grand total of 12 vertices in the graph, and the cut across it is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a local minima. You can probably see there's an obvious better cut of 0, but if this is the configuration you're in, if you move just one vertex from this side over to this side, it increases the cut. It makes things worse. Or this one over to here makes it worse. There's not even a pair of things that you can move to make things better. This is a local minima. If you're just swapping one thing back and forth or swapping 2 things, you can't make it better. And your local minima could have lots and lots and lots of equivalent partitions. So over here, I've got slightly modified the graph. I've got a vertex A. I can move it back and forth to one side of the partition or the other. Doesn't change the cut. Same thing with B, same thing with C, same thing with D. You could have an exponentially large number of equivalent, not particularly good partitions. So the local minimum, it's not just one point within the solution space. So back up here. So it's not simply just one point here and everything is worse or everything's better. You could have a large region where there's nothing better, nothing worse, and just sort of get stuck. And the Kernighan-Lin method, very well known, great idea, this sort of hill climbing and then lock in place and force things to move. Works pretty good. And I really want to emphasize the point. You're sort of stuck in a local minima. And to get out of it and to get better solutions, well, I'm going to go back to around 1983. and talk for a few minutes about simulated annealing. This was certainly a hot idea when I started graduate school. People were working a lot on annealing. And if you give the right reward function and enough CPU time, it could seem like it could do anything. Whatever your problem is, just formulate and simulate annealing, turn on the annealer, wait for a little while, and you've got a great answer pulling out. First applications were actually circuit placement and circuit routing. That's what's in this optimization by simulated annealing paper from '83. And the time when I started graduate school in 1991, this paper came out. And they're looking at the partitioning problem. And if I've got a big graph, say this G500 is 500 vertices. If I just do local optimization sort of greedy, you wind up with cuts around here. So this G500 graph was one of these graphs that they were playing with at Bell Labs. And the cut that would come out of this graph, around 260, 270, 280, somewhere in there. You hit a local minimum, and you sort of get stuck. Kernighan-Lin, which was also developed at Bell Labs, does significantly better. Around 230, 220 is the cut here. So substantial improvement. This over here is the result from simulated annealing. Gets a better result than Kernighan-Lin for these benchmarks and much lower spread. Look at the range of results here, much tighter. And so I thought this is an interesting sort of endorsement. Kernighan-Lin was developed by Kernighan-Lin while they were at Bell Labs. This paper, David Johnson, working at Bell Labs, basically giving a thumbs up and sort of an endorsement to simulate annealing that was developed by IBM. So you can think of it as like, this is not a sort of half-hearted, oh, sort of it works, recognizing that simulated annealing was actually quite effective. Randomized algorithm. But there's a problem. Annealing was working. Smallish problems, got a great answer. But you run into a little bit of trouble. And so I'm still in a little bit of despicable me meme culture here. We were all living through Moore's Law, and every year and a half or so, number of transistors doubles, we get roughly twice the performance. And so we get 2x the compute every year. Things are getting faster fast. And annealing was working well. For this graph of 500, this G500 graph, G500 graph, it's working well. But then you go to the next round of computers and problems. The problem has gone from 500 vertices to 1,000 vertices. It's doubled in size. So the size of the solution space is now 2 to the 1,000th. And 2 to the 2,000th is 2 to the 500th times larger than the original problem we had before. So the problem has gotten substantially larger, substantially harder, but we only got twice the computer power. And so the trouble we run into, simulated annealing runs out of gas. Problem sizes scale up and get bigger and bigger and bigger. The growth in the solution space is exponential, and we just can't keep up with the CPU processing power we've got. Annealing certainly had the lead for a while on partitioning. So go back to 1991, and at the time for a problem like G500, annealing was the best we could do. And it was definitely better than what Kernighan-Lin was able to achieve. But as partitioning heuristics got better, we got smarter with our partitioners, that lead got erased. And now heuristic partitioners, that's the way to go. And when I say simulated annealing runs out of gas, people who do physical design will say, well, what about floor planners? And that's a really interesting one. I'm going to try to hit that right at the end of the talk. I think that annealing-based floor planners should have died in 2008, but they did not. I'm not quite sure why. And I'm going to I may try to do something about that. Okay, we're coming up. And I'll digress, throw a couple of links. Again, I've been sort of knocking around this area. Great paper to read as to why brute force is not your answer. This old one by Gene Amdahl. If you have not read Amdahl's original paper, please do. It's excellent. And I sort of hit the same topic and tried to wake folks up again. IEEE design and test. Let's get back to partitioning. And I want to hit a couple more papers which have some really great ideas. There's a paper from Fiducian Mathesis. It was DEC 1982, if I recall correctly. And it had some just wizardry in data structures and efficient implementations. So you go from Kernighan-Lin, which might have been big O of n cubed if you just do a naive implementation. You probably get it down to n squared work, but it's not going to be competitive in terms of runtime with the big O of n for Fiducian Mathesis. And the key idea, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit. You've got some vertices, you've got a partition here. This vertex has a gain of 2 if you move from this side to this side. 2 nets are no longer cut if you move this over. This one has a gain of 1, so if you move from here over to here, reduce 1 cut net. And so what Fiducian Mathesis are doing is they're figuring out the gain for each vertex in the graph, and then they've got an excellent incremental update that basically allows them to run everything in linear time for a pass. Just absolutely brilliant data structure work. Read this paper, great paper. And then probably the biggest step forward in partitioning is multi-level hypergraph partitioning by George Grippus in his group at Minnesota. This is a DEC 96 paper. And their key idea is you start with some large flat graph and it's got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of vertices in it. And then you cluster the vertices, so you compress a couple of vertices that are connected. And so from this G0 into a smaller graph G1, then you do it again, G2, G3, G4, keep on clustering, clustering, clustering. Finally run Fiducian Mathesis on this clustered graph. And then you uncoarsen, refining this partition. And it is tremendously successful. And I'll note that a couple of years earlier, I was in the lab at UCLA. My advisor, Jason Kong, and one of my lab mates, Melissa Smith, had the idea of going from here, clustering down here and partitioning. Worked great. It boggles my mind that nobody in the lab, we didn't spot, we did this trick once, do the trick twice, 3 times. There's times where you think, okay, there's a very, very, very simple idea. Nobody sees it until Heuristics came along. And I want to really hit how much of a step forward this is. So this is some tables out of a paper from 1998, ISPD, by Chuck Alpert, where he got some large circuits from inside IBM. I don't know that he had full permission to do everything he did, but he did it anyway, so thank you, Chuck. And so he took the circuit designs and he anonymized it. He stripped off all the functionality, but we've got these big graphs with vertices, all sorts of connectivity, and IBM circuits of various size. And he ran it through straightforward Fiducian Mathesis. A partitioner called Clip which was actively being developed at the time, and also through H-metas. And we're trying to find balanced cuts and split a large graph into 2 chunks, minimize the number of cut nets going from one side to the other. And the magnitude of the win for H-metas is just gobsmacking. For instance, let's grab, say, IBM 17. The minimum out of lots and lots and lots of runs that they saw, 3,634 cuts for IBM 17. Drops down to 2,389 for H-metas. And you look at the average cut, They're taking lots of runs, lots of random starts. Average is about 7,800 versus 2,600 with HMetis. So HMetis is doing much, much, much better, not even close to FM. And the real kicker that sort of caught my attention, about 260 seconds for the CPU on FM, 125, 126 for HMetis. HMetis is faster, and it produces much, much, much better results. And so I remember sitting through this paper and just scratching my head. You know, all this wizardry, you know, I should have seen it while I was sitting at UCLA next to Melissa, who was doing this work. Light bulb should have gone on, didn't go on. So Heuristics has got this multi-level sort of thing going, and it is absolutely stunningly good. And so for the next entirely too many years, this was sort of in my back of my head as to exactly why is this working, and it works great for partitioning. I want to be able to steal this magic and use it somewhere else. And so I'm really looking at this as when we're running a partitioner, when we're trying to partition a large graph. I've got this sort of black illustration here. That might be the raw solution space, every possible configuration of some large graph that I'm trying to partition. When we're clustering the graph, we're compressing vertices together, and we're actually turning the original solution space into a subset. So everything in the cluster graph exists in this larger case. But here, so we've got a smaller graph, and it's also better quality on average. I did this study on this and this was something that couldn't think of where to publish it. My student Mohammed Kasani was working on this and got this result and sort of this observation. It wasn't anything we thought we could fly into a paper, but it was interesting. So we sort of snuck it into this paper that we did at ISPD. And the experiment is basically I take some graph, and if I just randomly partition it and just randomly assign, I just measure the cut and do that a bunch of times. This flat graph, average cut is around 9,200. And I have the world's simplest, dumbest clustering algorithm that just takes vertices that are connected, mashes them together, reduces the number of nodes, randomly partition that. Cut goes from 9,200 down to 7,000. The average solution in a random partition, better on this cluster graph. And you can play this trick again and again and again. And there's diminishing returns after a while. But I think to myself, how did HMetis become so successful? You've got this raw graph out here, and the average cut out here might be 9,200. You reduce it, and the average cut of these vertices drops to 7,200. Do it again, then drops to 5,600, drops it again, keeps on dropping. So as we get the graph smaller and smaller and smaller, it's also better on average. We have better solutions. And so that's how HMetis wound up absolutely knocking simulated annealing out of the running. If you've got a small solution space, okay, you can take a lot of CPU time and throw it to the computer and let the computer run and grind, and annealing will figure it out. As solution problem sizes grow, this problem gets bigger and harder, it becomes way too expensive to just try brute force. And then get smarter with your algorithms, your heuristics. They erased any lead that simulated annealing might have had at any point. And these days, there's just no contest. HMetis far outruns, and you've got K-Hypar and MLPart. There's a number of them. that just run far beyond. And I'm sort of highlighting this because back when I started graduate school, again, annealing was one of the hot topics. Everybody was working on it, thinking it was going to be the magic cure for all of our ills. And then it sort of fizzled out. When I think about AI, and I'm going to hit this at the tail end of this talk, that's where I'm seeing lots of stuff happening right now with AI. I don't believe it is a long-term solution. So, all right, now let me pivot here. I'm going to talk about global routing, and I'm going to try to explain how I see global routing as really a weird partitioning problem. This motivated a couple of years ago, ISPD 2024. There was a GPU machine learning enhanced large-scale global routing contest. So this is from a team at NVIDIA, and they had some large designs internally, and they're going to turn them into global routing problems. They anonymized it enough so that they could actually give these large circuits. And these are actually fairly large things. Talking around 49 million standard cells, thousands of macro blocks. Let me do this. And we've got something like 59 million nets, 213 million pins. This is a pretty large set of benchmarks to throw at people. And it's a global routing problem. So we've got multi-layer sort of global routing grids. So this is a global routing cell. It's actually 10 layers. So there's alternating horizontal and vertical connections. And so you've got via edges. So it's a three-dimensional graph. And in order to encourage the use of, surprisingly enough, it's an NVIDIA-sponsored contest. So they're encouraging everybody to use NVIDIA GPUs. And so the contest environment, the initial plan was for 4A100, and I think they upscaled it to, I think it's the H200, so even more GPU power. Lots of memory on each, and also 8 threads on the host x86 processor. So again, a contest intended to speed up global routing and to throw a big problem at people and open the door for GPU use and machine learning use. Now, I've sort of been looking at this problem off and on for years. And so we've got a paper that's going to appear next week. And I just got a notification about an hour ago. The paper is live in the digital library. So you've got the QR code for it. And this is joint work with one of my students. Rowan Devereux-Smith is actually an undergrad. They're a dual major in linguistics and computer science. And I pulled Rowan into it, and they were working on this for a little while. And a lot of the optimizer, Rowan's code. And I wanted to take a different tack on this. And again, sort of keeping in mind the wins from HMetis, try to attack the problem a little bit differently and not do just a classical rip up and reroute router just with more cores and speeding up. So the classical framework, you start off by building some Steiner trees, break every net down into sort of 2-pin connections, and then take 3 edges, these 2-pin connections, and find a path through the routing graph to connect everything. And it's usually Dijkstra algorithm or A*, or something like that, some line search sort of thing. And then the rip up and reroute is you wind up with a graph and there's overcongestion and some parts of the graph are overutilized. So you remove some connection and then you route it again. And you keep on doing that until you run out of time or things converge to an acceptable solution. And this is where really the time-consuming part of global routing normally comes in. If you've got a congested design, The rip up and reroute engine can be sitting there all day long, just yanking something out, putting something else back in, trying to find a better solution. Dijkstra has a lot of different ways it can connect a pair of points. So there's the easy one of things like that, like that. But Dijkstra, if you've got routing congestion, each one of these resources could have different cost. And so you've got zigzaggy patterns, potentially even detours outside the rounding box. Dijkstra can find the cheapest way between these pair of points, but it's a little bit compute intensive, a little bit expensive, and there are lots of ways to do it. And so I'm going to do some back of the envelope and try to get you an idea as to why I went a different direction on this. You've got the solution space. And again, I'm using this picture, it's just 256, but imagine the solution space of if I've got 100 million routes, which is about how many you'd have in one of these larger designs. So I've got 100 million of these routes. And for every 2-point connection, I've got all sorts of zigzaggy, stair-steppy things. So there's usually a exponential number of paths between any pair of points that are separated. So just back of the envelopes, let's say it's 1,000 different choices. Solution space is 1,000 to the 100 million power. That is a very, 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 very large solution space. And when we're doing global routing, we're at some vertex, some configuration in the solution space, and we take a edge out, and we'll run Dijkstra's algorithm, and we move to somewhere else, and we take another edge out, run Dijkstra's algorithm, move to somewhere else. This is a really unpleasant optimization space to be working in. And every time we want to take some change, we're running Dijkstra's algorithm or something like that, which is CPU time. And okay, we could have maybe multiple processors doing it, get the GPUs to come and help. But it's not pleasant. We're running into a lot of trouble. So here's where I'm going to go in a little bit of a weird direction. Or actually, let me talk. And then rip and reroute process, conventional approach. We might have thousands of global routing cells, tens of thousands of global cells that are over capacity. We can have hundreds of thousands of routes going through them that are problematic. We know we have to move some of them, but we don't really know which one to move. So the selection of which edge to reroute, which edge to take out, it's pretty close to random. Not much strategy here. Take something out, put something back in. And then putting that stuff back in, there's Pathfinder and a number of other routers that have tried to bias costs to drive routes away from where they were just taken out to try to find different solutions. But you could run the router and run Dijkstra and try to find another path, and it might not be any better. And so you're just going to keep on this rip up and reroute cycle until you're tired of doing it. And so here, going to seem a little weird. This is the figure from HMetis. I'm going to steal their idea of this multi-level. You could have the original routing graph and every possible route, so anything that Dijkstra could find, call that your original solution space. Anything goes. I'm going to go to a subset of that and say, well, let's only look at possible pattern routes, simple routes, single band, maybe 2-band routes. This solution space, this one is much smaller. And I'm going to go another step further. Not just any pattern route. I'm going to consider only 2 possible pattern routes for each connection I need to make. So we're going from 1,000 to 100 million to 2 to the 100 million. To the 100 million, that's much smaller. Much smaller. I like that. And so just in terms of what I'm talking about with pattern routes, if I'm connecting this point to this point, here's a 2-segment pattern route, another 2-segment pattern route, or I'll go up to 3 segments. So zigzagging like that, or here. much smaller than the number of monotonic paths that go from here to here, and smaller still than if I allow detours. So it's a smaller number to begin with. And then from here, I'm going to only pick 2 of the pattern routes to consider. So even smaller set. And now I'm going to turn the fiducia methesis sort of partitioner into a global router. So I'll start off and I'll build some Steiner trees, and then this initial pattern route for each edge, randomly choose up and left or down and right, one of the 2 L-shaped bends for each connection. Pick one, throw it out there. Going to have very high congestion, it's not going to be a great routing solution. After that, I've got a routing surface, I've got some idea of where some congestion is, I've got some idea where there's not congestion. I can find pattern routes by using dynamic programming. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I will choose exactly 2 patterns. The original L-shaped bend they started with, and then whatever I find the cheapest through dynamic programming. Then I'm going to implement a priority queue, similar to what fiducia methesis were doing with their bucket strategy. Then what I've got down here is basically a single pass of fiducia methesis. You take something out of this priority queue, basically a maximum gain, swap it, update costs incrementally using a method very similar to what fiducia methesis is doing. And here's my cat, who always likes to jump on Zoom calls. Hello, cat. The wonders of working at home. You would not believe the number of times my cat's on camera for Zoom. Update the cost incrementally, do that efficiently, keep on doing that, and eventually run it again. We run more passes. We do this again, keep cycling through. So it's very, very, very much like fiducia methesis. I want to talk this darn cat. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the routing model. So I've got the simplified thing. I've got a bunch of a 3x3 grid of global routing cells. I've got 2 connections I need to make, A here to A over here, B here to B over here. And I'm tracking congestion between borders of global routing cells. So this is resource 0, resource 1, resource 2, resource 3. So I've got all these borders numbered. I'm going to call this a path. So path 0, this dark red one, uses resource 1, 2, 17, and 20. So path 0 uses resource 1, 2, 17, and 20. I have this alternate path that might be generated by dynamic programming that could go down this way using 15, resource 15, 18, 9, and 10. That's these. These are my 2 choices for connection A. I've got a similar sort of thing for connection B. And to enable efficient updates and to do all the calculations quick enough, every single resource, so this is my resource 2, has, as part of its data structure, a list of requests that are being made. In particular, there's a request from path P0 for this resource. That's this right here. This resource is keeping track of the fact that this path is interested in it and is using it. Same thing for this one. Every single border between my grid cells, my global routing cells, keeps track of which paths are passing over. I'm also keeping track for this alternate path down here. And the way this works in cost updates and this getting this efficient was sort of critical for making this strategy work. In this slide, I'm going to have a very, very simple cost model for congestion. It's going to be the square of the number of routing edges that use a particular resource. Zoom in here. So resource 1 has one edge crossing over it. So square of 1 gets you cost of 1. So it's cost 1 here. And I'm actually keeping track of how much it costs and the difference from if I remove the edge. So if I take this edge away, cost here drops to 0. So it's the current cost of 1, cost of 0 if I take that edge away. So the delta there is 1. Here, I've got 2 edges crossing resource 2. So I square that. The cost of this resource, the way it's currently being used, is 4 units. It's 2 squared. This edge here, if I take it out, the cost drops to 1 because there's only 1 left here. So it's cost of 4, we go down 1. That's why this one costs 3 units. I'm paying 3 units to have either this one here or this one here. If I take one of those away, I drop down the global cost by 3. And so this path P0, if I add everything up, has a cost of 10. This alternate path that goes down this way, no congestion here, no congestion here, no congestion here, no congestion here, has a cost of 4. In fiduciamethesis, they're tracking the gain of moving a vertex from one side to the other. So fiduciamethesis, looking at the gain of if I move this vertex from left-hand side to right-hand side or vice versa, they're tracking gain. I'm looking at gain as what's the difference between path and some other path that I could use. This one cost me 10, this one cost me 4. Potential gain is 6 units if I switch to the other side. And so we're doing something very much like fiduciamethesis. I've got my original graph, original routing. Here's where I've decided the edges are. Also a second alternate path for each one of these. I calculate the gain for each connection. This has a gain of 6. This also has a gain of 6. Both of these go into the priority queue. I pick one, whichever has the highest gain out. I switch the routes. And because I've got the data structures behind it, I can go through and update every single edge, every single connection, every single resource that interacts with this thing. And the idea for fiduciamethesis, they're assuming that the update only changes things locally, makes a small updates here, there, and everywhere. You don't have to redo the entire graph. And so it gets linear time. Same sort of idea here. If I've got a big 10,000 by 10,000 grid global routing problem, I change one route in some corner of the design. I don't need to update every single graph. I don't update everything. It's only a local change. So what this lets us have is what I'm calling strategic rip and route. Rather than grab an edge somewhere, grab something, take it out, run Dijkstra, hope that it's better, grab something, take it out, hope that it's better, grab something, take it out, hope it's better. Every single connection in the entire routing graph, I know exactly what the impact is on my congestion cost if I switch from one route to the other. I've got this gain that I'm keeping up to date. And so I can find the route anywhere in the design that has the most benefit to my cost objective if I switch it. Take it out, switch it, update the data structures, do it again. Pick out this next one, and the next one, and the next one. And so rather than blindly rip up and reroute, grab something, hope for the best, we know exactly where to go and what to change it to. We're not running a Dijkstra algorithm, we're not doing anything, just flip between 2 choices. And the Fiducium thesis paper, just wonderful data structure wizardry. Read that about 100 times and keep on reading it. It's excellent, excellent stuff. Highest gains, writing edges are in priority queue, ordered by gain. Select one at a time, keep on flipping them over. We are doing this sort of hill climbing sort of thing, which I'll hit in a second. And then after we're done, and the updates are batched, so it's quite efficient. After we're done, we can roll back to the best thing we saw so far. And here's I take photos of my whiteboard periodically. This was back in the early days when I was working with Rowan, and we were just drawing sketch after sketch after sketch, trying to figure out exactly how do we set up our data structures. And because these graphs are large, I'm counting the number of bytes, paying real close attention and so each decision I have to make as to some routing edge as to which one it chooses, got down to 16 bytes. The options, I've 16 bytes, and resource requests, 8 bytes each. Squeezing every last drop out of the data structures. We implemented all of this in Rust. It was very, very careful. Not necessarily the easiest data structure to cook up, but once we got it dialed in, pretty darn happy with it. And so one of the obvious questions is finding the alternate routes. There's some classic dynamic programming tricks you can sort of do. At the start of each pass, you've got a bunch of routes already in place. You know that you've got congestion. You know you don't have the great solution, but you can calculate running cost for congestion across each row and column. And there's basic prefix sum sort of techniques you can use so that any segment from column I to column J, you can figure out what is the total cost of it. You just grab the endpoint of the running total, subtract off the start point of the running total, and in constant time, you can get the cost of any segment. And so you can look at 2 to 3 segment paths and compute the cost of them in constant time. And most edges are short, so you only have a few number of simple paths to consider. If they're longer edges, we look at a subset of potential paths. And so for every edge in the routing graph, we go through and we look with this sort of static cost surface and say, what's the best alternate path that we could have, assuming we're doing some sort of simple 3-segment pattern route. And so you've got the current route, that's your active route. You've got the alternate, which you might want to switch to. You calculate the gain on both, or calculate the cost on both. That gets you your gain. I want to touch on this. So one of the surprises we had, I thought we were going to see hill climbing. In partitioning, if you watch the cut, you see these little hurdles, and it goes up and goes down, and goes up and goes down. We tracked the total congestion cost as one of these paths go by. And what we're seeing is just sort of smooth, start off here, and you're just getting savings, everything's good, everything's good. Then a long period where you can change nets and nothing happens. And the very tail end, it gets worse. I expected hill climbing. I expected to see more of a jagged curve. I don't know why it looks like this, but that's what we're seeing. And so that lets us do early exit. Keep on doing here, then when it flattens out, call it a day there, and then start a new pass. And you say, does this work? Actually, it seems to work pretty well. We did not win the contest. I think Peking University with Hippo came in first, second, and third. These are all using massive GPU resources and multi-threading pretty extensively. Our results, within a couple of percent. Very, very, very close. We're doing single processor, single thread, no parallelism. And one thing that I didn't know at the start, when we restrict the solution space to say only simple pattern routes, no maze routing anywhere, And even on a single layer, it's one segment on one layer, another segment on a different layer. So we're not even changing layers when we're going the same direction. Able to find very good solutions. The only place we had trouble, largest benchmark Terra cluster, we were hitting memory limits on that. We've got no idea how to fix that. And so restricting to only 2 patterns still allows for excellent solutions. We were doing this single core. Again, about a 4x the wall time of the routers that were massively parallel. So I think we're quite competitive. Running the entire design, no matter how large it is, flat, and no maze routing. Again, trying to take a very different take, do something different on global routing. And we've got, I think, more to go. So we did all possible routes, crunched down to possible pattern routes, just 2 patterns. There's some more tricks we got up our sleeve, working on that. Rather than going with brute force and trying to just throw more processor cores at the problem, trying to be smarter about how we solve the problem. And so, okay, I've got just a few minutes, so I'm going to wrap up. So I talked about the good, which I see as algorithms, and the ugly, which is heuristics. Heuristics, they don't promise anything. They're just sort of back of the envelope guesstimates, but they work. So the good and the ugly, big fan. Let me talk about the bad for a minute and get myself in a little bit of trouble with a couple minutes we got. I remember years ago when simulated annealing took the world by storm and everybody thought this was the solution to all our problems. And it ran out of gas, does not scale very well, and we got better algorithms and better heuristics to knock it out of the running. And so I look at this craze for AI and VLSI physical design, and it feels like deja vu all over again. I'm not convinced that it's the long-term solution. Definitely does a good job of playing Go and chess. It has some applications that's pretty cool, but I'm not convinced it's what we need for every problem you could imagine. In particular, I do physical design, place and route. I'm really not a fan of what I'm seeing in physical design. And to highlight why I'm sort of a stickler on this, much of my research history revolves around benchmarking. I did a paper in 2001 where I was looking at standard cell placement results that got published. And there was this sort of random walk of reported results. They didn't make any sense. And so I threw it all into one table. Not everybody was thrilled to be in that table because you scratch your head and say, okay, it doesn't look good. But the good news is the physical design community, lots of folks I think were seeing things the same way I did. And we all banded together and got really pretty serious about benchmarking. And a paper that I think annoyed people in 2001, got asked to do a retrospective on it 20 years later. And ISPD has had a really strong community doing benchmarking, comparison, checking results. Fantastic. Very, very happy with everybody in ISPD. And so we'll hit this, probably if you've seen any AI stuff, you've seen the reinforcement learning macro placement paper from Google. And there was a lot of concern and a lot of criticism from physical design folks. They were not using open benchmarks. It was hard to compare. And so Andrew Kong and CK Cheng from UC San Diego really dove in, implemented to the best of their ability this machine learning circuit training reinforcement learning approach that was described in Nature. They also did annealing and ran things through Replace, which was their internal mixed size placer. And on these benchmarks that are publicly available, people have been using them forever, Replace much better than annealing, much, much, much better than the reinforcement learning. And here's something I haven't published, but I've been working in this area for 25 years. And here's circuit training. If Replace is unity, Circuit training is 35% worse in terms of wire length, to the best of our knowledge. And you go back earlier, it's worse than what, it's my paper from 2004. I'm about 14% worse than modern replays. This is done on an IBM ThinkPad in 2004, ThinkPad laptop. Much better wire length, way, 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 way back then. And here's a little bit better picture. Got another paper, Feng 13% here. NTU place, 2008, about 1% away from replace. Again, much better than circuit training. So you have to go back a really long time to find anything where, as far as we can tell, this machine learning sort of thing is competitive. And it's not just macro placement. This is a paper that showed up in TCAD 2022 using reinforcement learning for floor planning. Standard benchmarks are N100, 200, 300, widely used. You've got some numbers for this good floor plan, convolution-based reinforcement learning floor planner. Missed a citation, missed some literature. Go back to 2008. This DFIR floor planner from Jackie Yan and Chris Chu. Much, much, much better results. Here's a good floor plan versus DFIR N100, 309 versus 208. Much, much faster. And DFIR is from nearly 20 years ago. Beats the daylights out of this reinforcement learning approach. And DFIR does these designs in less than 1 second on a machine from 2008. DFIR is using partitioning, which is a heuristic, and dynamic querying, which will classify as algorithms. So I look at what's happening, this sort of craze, everybody's jumping into AI, machine learning this, machine learning that. I'm having a hard time understanding why it's a good idea. What I'm seeing, at least in my physical design universe, the reinforcement learning requires specialized and expensive hardware, consumes a lot more power, needs more wall time, just more wall times regular waiting, and the results are dramatically worse than prior work from decades ago. I don't understand it. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but I do not see this as being competitive in the physical design world. So for me, I'll wrap up and say, good algorithms, ugly heuristics. This is the way we ought to go in EDA. And I think I'm running low on time, so I'll stop it here. And thanks for letting me rant about this stuff. Questions, you can yell at me, pitchforks, torches. The AI people can tell me how bad I am for not knowing how to do it.
So thank you, Patrick. Very nice talk. So I'm waiting here for some questions.
Yep, I see one in the chat.
Do your questions as soon as possible.
Yep, I'll
so
get
we have
to...
a question here by Professor Marcelo Johan. So for multi-level partitioning, do you have an idea on the impact of clustering decisions? Itself could be clustered to another neighbor or give a very different course graph or not?
Yeah, so I think clustering decisions, there are different clustering algorithms, and certainly some are better than others. You change how you cluster, you get a sort of different subset of the solution space. And that's, I think, HMeta's had a couple of different strategies, and some of them work better on some graphs than others. MLPart, KE HiPar, all these great partitioners. So they do affect sort of which part of the solution space you're sampling. What I'm doing here, world's dumbest clustering algorithm, because I didn't want to take the time to do exhaustively. So I'm getting some improvements here. I think the better, smarter clustering algorithms would do better here, but they're all sort of capturing the same basic principle of we're getting a subset of the solution space, so the problem becomes smaller, and we're also getting better stuff in there. It's so lower hills to climb over if we're doing hill climbing, smaller local minima, so they're easier to crawl out of, shorter distances to good new local minima to arrive to. So we've got an easier problem to solve, a better, and everything we look in there is better quality on average. Clustering algorithms, heuristics, definitely make a difference. I don't know which one would be best.
Thank you. So another question by Marcelo. When only using heuristic algorithms, how to avoid missing degrees of freedom, parts of solution space, or having bias? In other words, do you think a randomized algorithms like simulated annealing are enough to avoid bias in the heuristics?
I see it as sort of a trade-off. If we go with annealing and say you have no constraints whatever, solution space is huge, and then you're sort of running into, can you get through the solution space fast enough? Do you have enough CPU time? If you could run annealing for an infinite amount of time, then it'll get the optimal answer. Trouble is, we don't have an infinite amount of time. And so shrinking the solution space, and you're introducing a bias, you're restricting things that you can look at, but you want to with better solution. And so one of the metaphors I usually go with is, suppose you're looking for, you want to find a diamond. You want to find a valuable stone. And I can say to you, I will drop you anywhere in the universe, or I will drop you in a jewelry store, and you have 15 minutes to find the best diamond you can. Anywhere in the universe, okay, there's probably a fantastic diamond out there. But if I drop you in the middle of the jungle in Brazil, you're going to look and you're going to be chasing for an hour, and you're probably not going to find a diamond. If I drop you in a jewelry store in Arequipa, you'll probably find a diamond there. And so restricting the solution space, do you potentially lose the optimal solution? Yes, absolutely. But you're looking in a much richer, much better restricted set. And so that's, you have a bias, and you're getting biased in the general direction of better solutions. And that's, I think, a little bit of the counterintuitive part about it. You think H-meta says, we're going to cluster things together, take choices away. That's how they get to the better solution.
Thank you. So I'm seeing no more questions here in the chat. So, Patrick, do you have some data about the comparison of the energy cost when using our traditional algorithms or using machine learning ones?
I don't have any hard data, but you think of it of compare simulated annealing runs longer, or the mixed size placement paper. I ran a x86 ThinkPad for 40 minutes to get a solution for IBM 01 on my 20-year-old IBM ThinkPad. Google's using their TPU farm of God knows how many processing units, talking about building a nuclear power plant to be able to power the thing and cool it. I think it's this sort of brute force strategy. Crazy. Way too much power, way too much compute resources, and it's not a better answer. So I think it's just hands down, look for the best, most efficient algorithm you can, the effective heuristic. I'm not seeing much, at least in the physical design world, where I'd say I would want to have an AI-driven solution.
Okay, so thank you very much, Patrick, for the nice talk. I'm not seeing no more questions here. thank you very much again, and I hope to see you in person in a near future.
Yep.
And so I invite all you to see in the YouTube channel the announcement of next CASS Talks. And thank you very much for attending this very nice talk by Patrick today. And so see you soon. So have a nice